And with all orchestras, an orchestra is a dynamic group of people, and the director is functionally mixing the orchestra. He's not just waving his thing trying to keep time. I mean, real directors in real orchestras are also a little louder, a little hold down, and they're keeping it moving and keeping everything kind of in shape, and adjusting sort of how people deliver what they're doing. So I learned pretty quickly that what had been going on in Davis's company, which is you put the right mic here and you put the left mic here, and it just wasn't balanced very well, because it put the mics too close to some people who were in the front row of the orchestra, and the stereo had this big sort of hole in the middle. So I began to work with coincident mic techniques, like say Blumlein and XY. XY is cardioids at 120 degrees off axis, and finally settling on small diaphragms as being my preference there. And Blumlein is bidirectional mics, 90 off axis, and experimenting with, can I afford to have some of the orchestra slightly in the sides of that Blumlein pair, which means technically they're out of phase, but just a little bit kind of made it nice. Anyway, so a lot of things I learned that later paid me dividends when I was doing orchestra tracks in the studio and that sort of thing. I wasn't scratching my head wondering what in the world to do with a room full of string players. I knew. And with a lot of the various little demos and groups and bluegrass bands and whatever we ran through the studio, I learned a lot of stuff. If you look on a drum kit and miking it, it's not unlike a small orchestra. It's not unlike a small acoustic combo. You've got all these clustered sources of sound, and you've got to figure out how to deal with them as a balance and make a presentation. So like with the bluegrass guys, back then these were not polished players. They were good players, but they were used to standing in a cluster and letting it rip, so I had to figure out how to get mics in there. And that's where I started working on my thing of having a cluster of mics in the middle looking out from the center, so people kind of grouped around them. Everybody saw each other, everybody was close. But my microphones I was taking advantage of the pickup patterns of the mics, so that on a cardioid microphone it's least sensitive towards the back, so that's put most of the combo sort of behind each of these mics, and that way I got surprising isolation between the performers. Well, that same thing works great with gospel choirs and with other kinds of music. It works great with backup singers and sometimes with horn sections, lots of other kinds of music. So anyway, all those little demos, all those little gigs, I always had at least one experiment running on every session. I didn't talk about it, and I made sure that it wasn't something that would ever adversely affect them. If it went wrong, I would stop doing it and do something else immediately. But it gave me a chance to really try a billion different things and learn which ones really seemed to work for me. So this was the kind of learning I wanted to do. If I'd really kind of been haphazard there in those 3 or 4 years in Chicago, and back in it, I was damn well going to get sharp on this stuff. So, and the only way to really do that was, first of all, to be full time at it, not have some other job I had to deal with during the week. So that meant I had to get all of it I could through these little studios. So anyway, I was at Davis until the beginning of 1980. At that point, instead of rebuilding the studio, which had been sort of our tacit deal, that if I showed him that there was studio business, that he would get on board and we'd do some heavy renovation and improve the place, he wasn't really going that direction. In fact, there was a character that was the music director for PTL at the time, with the improbable name of Thurlow Spur. And Thurlow was doing this recording work at Reflection for PTL, and he saw what seemed to be a lot of money going into paying for studio services, and he thought, this should be going to me. Yeah, that's kind of the theme of PTL, frankly. So anyway, so he figured if he could become a partner with Davis and rebuild the studio, since he was the music director, he could direct stuff there. Davis was pitching me as part of what was going on there, but he knew I was leaving. I decided to bail out at the beginning of 1980 because I just didn't like where things were going. Meanwhile, I'd made an album for a family of country musicians, the Moody family, and they wanted to open a place and asked me if I'd be involved, so I joined up with them. So I was out of Davis, and and spring and summer got Le Mans Studios going out southeast of the city, and got it busy in a hurry. So we made a lot of records there and did a lot of things, but the patriarch of the Moody family, who was a fine guy in many respects, but he and I could not have been more different. I came out of Chicago. I grew up in advertising. I mean, came from a big bustling place where you got to step out there and go for it. You know, you gotta tell people what you can do and show them, and you gotta market and push and hustle and this kind of stuff. And he came from a place, and he finally explained to me in his way that he felt that if you open a business, you should hang out your sign, and folks know where to get it. And if they don't want it, you leave them alone. And at that moment, I thought, I'm out of here. So, next I knew, he and I had no business in the same company. And the owner of Reflection, Wayne Jernigan, had been sort of sending feelers through mutual friends for about a year. And I thought, maybe it's time to go talk to Wayne. So in the fall of '80, I went over and met with Wayne at Reflection, and we made a deal. And I started there in late October, and was there almost 18 years, and still continued to work there as a freelancer as long as the place was open.